You have my kind of
Second.
memory. All right, I've got Chris's motion and Kevin's, or I'm sorry, Arlen's second. Are there any comments, questions, corrections? Right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? And how many abstentions today?
Aye.
Abby?
Me, Justine Hernandez.
Us. Okay. Motion passes. Our item 3 on our agenda is submitted public comments for this meeting.
No comment.
And, we have not received any for the meeting. Just a reminder, any that we receive after our cutoff time and for our next meeting will be posted to our website. Right, so on item number 4 and 5, which are our primary reasons for being here today, I'd like to kick it off. We're happy to introduce Supervisor Rex Scott from Pima County Board of Supervisors, who is the county's, as we all know, who is the county's representative on the PAG and RTA boards. And I think we also have member General Ted Maxwell. I believe he's online now, but Supervisor Scott, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair McGovern. And I wanted to begin, ladies and gentlemen, the same way I began the last time I was a guest at one of your meetings, which is to thank all of you for your commitment and for your time. You don't get paid for doing this work. And some of you have been doing it since 2018. And we are deeply grateful, the entire RTA board, for your commitment and your time. So I always want to start anytime I'm a guest of the CAC just by saying thank you. And I was very struck when Tom came to our last meeting, which was last week, that he made a point of saying that achieving consensus and collaboration has been an overarching goal for him and for Carolyn and Mary ever since they started in these roles 5 years ago. I joined the RTA board as the county's representative in January of 2021. That's the same month that General Maxwell joined as the governor's Southern Arizona representative to the Arizona State Transportation Board. And I will tell you that every vote that we have taken on the RTA board in that time period that's been related to RTA Next has been by a 9-0 vote. Now, I will also tell you, and I'm sure General Maxwell would agree, that on those days that we had those 9-0 votes, we sometimes came into this room not knowing how we would get to that point. But we did, and I believe that the reason that we did is because all 9 of us believe in the importance of consensus and regional collaboration. I also would point out something that General Maxwell said in some of the emails that bounced back and forth when we were invited by your leadership to come today. 3 words: we are close. And I think he's right. I think because of the hard work that all of you have been doing, you are very close. So what I would ask each of you is to ask yourself the following questions throughout the course of your deliberations today. Number 1, is what I am pushing for likely to result in greater consensus and collaboration? Second, is what I am pushing for likely to result in a plan that will have broad regional support? And third, if the answer to either of those questions is no, how can I revise my position to get to yes? As far as what you heard from the RTA board last week, in terms of the guidance and direction that we offered. I think what you heard is that we want you to have a wide-ranging discussion and that everything is on the table, because you should not have limits on the dialogue that you need to have to achieve consensus and collaboration. We passed a motion unanimously in March, and we reiterated it in May, and that motion said this: a motion directing PAG RTA staff to provide the TMC and CAC with all information necessary to make recommendations to the RTA board on the roadway element, such as the previously requested ADOT project funding scenarios, and this is the crucial part for today. The second part of that motion says to enable TMC, CAC to have a comprehensive discussion and make recommendations to the RTA board on all RTA plan elements: roadway, transit, safety, environmental, and economic vitality. You heard during our meeting, if you subjected yourself to listening to it, that there was some discussion about the fact that we put in place several months ago some amounts for each one of the categorical elements. But those amounts are meant to be starting points for discussion. They are not meant to be straitjackets to inhibit the discussion that all of you need to have here to achieve consensus and collaboration. And you also heard, if you watched our meeting, that there is a great desire on the part of the entire RTA board for this meeting to result in the kind of consensus and collaboration that is going to help us to achieve greater consensus, and ultimately is going to help our entire community to achieve that consensus once we move to the ballot. There was discussion, as there should have been, about the fact that something that was voted on last time this group met was approved, but by a 9-7 vote. We are hopeful, the RTA board is hopeful, that what comes out of today is moving us, if not towards the unanimity that we've been able to achieve, certainly to broader consensus than what was demonstrated in that last vote. So I think your takeaway from what we talked about last week is that you should have a wide-ranging discussion. You should not feel that anything is off limits. You should feel that you can look at those categorical amounts, and as long as there aren't drastic changes, you can have those discussions if the goal is, as it should be, to achieve consensus. The ad hoc working group that has been doing some very important work over the last few weeks has helped us to move forward. And I thank the CAC members who are part of it. I thank the TMC members who are part of it, including Mr. DeBonis, who is here today. I think direct interaction between CAC and TMC members is absolutely vital. And I'm glad that there's been more of that through the working group, and I hope that you will engage in dialogue with Mr. DeBonis today if you have questions to ask that would help with regard to the symbiotic relationship between the CAC and the TMC. This might seem a little corny, but I am going to finish up with my last word of advice to all of you, which is a quote that we used a lot in the last school where I was a principal before I retired. And it's actually based on an old African proverb. And the proverb is this: if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And I hope that that is something that helps to guide all of your individual thinking and all of your actions as a group today. I will be here for the entire meeting. And if there's anything that I can do to help you to achieve that consensus and collaboration that Tom talked about last week, I'm here to do it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Supervisor. I see that General Maxwell is also on the call, and I see a smiling face in front of me there, so that's great. Before I give him the floor, though, I would like to thank both of them, and by extension, the board, for the support, the unwavering support that they've given the committee, and their patience in watching us labor our way through some difficult conversations. And I'm sure that today's will be somewhat difficult, but I am optimistic, as I told the board the other day. Someone asked me, I think it was the supervisor, why are you optimistic? And I believe I gave him my best non-answer.
You said wild-eyed optimism.
Yeah, I did say wide-eyed optimist, and that's true. But in any case, thank you both for being with us today, and the previous times you've been with us as well. Both have been great supporters of ours. So without further ado, General Maxwell, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all again. And I'm going to echo what Supervisor Scott said. You know, the amount of effort and work. I obviously was on the CAC when it stood up, what, 5-6 years ago now? I mean, it's been a long time. And I know for a lot of you, it's been, a lot of hurry up and wait. And then, okay, now hurry up and get us an answer. It tends to go that way, I think, a lot of times, but we really appreciate all the effort, all the voices, and all the input. And honestly, even more importantly, I appreciate all the willingness for everybody to try to cooperate, collaborate. You know, we know a lot of you have been talking to try to come to a solution that can get there. And I agree with Supervisor Scott. I think we're close. The meeting, for those of you who didn't watch the meeting last week of the RTA board, we eventually said, okay, enough. We can't really add anything to it other than the fact that we think it's really close. We know that there's still different pockets and different municipalities and communities throughout the region that have some issues they really still want to see get addressed. And I think we did emphasize at the last board meeting that, especially, if there's some high priorities from the different folks that make up the board and they want to get on, those things need to be worked out and try to come to a solution. And I do believe we are really close. But that said, I'm not here to tell you that you have to come to the solution today. You have to solve anything. What I'd love to see, maybe a recommendation come to the board, but that's not going to be the end of your discussions. I know there's a lot of issues that you haven't discussed yet that I think would be very beneficial to the board with after you come up with a solution for this, the current situation you're facing with the half cent. There are several policy issues that have to be discussed, things about changing technologies, things about if there's going to be any recommendations to the board of part of it that are outside of the project list and the categoricals, but would be important to let the citizens know when we go out for a vote. We've found that not all projects that we thought 20 years ago were perfect now. Well, idea of having a discussion about putting some time frame in there to review those is probably viable. We're asking you to get together now for this half cent plan, but nobody's really talked about if you want to make a recommendation to the board to go higher. My suggestion would be get the half cent plan moving forward. Doesn't mean you can't follow up with, but this is what we left out and this is what we think you need to consider. Again, if you're going to do that, you've got to make sure it's really a strong consensus. But I think on the half cent plan now, you are really close. You've got a lot of people that have been having a lot of deep discussions, and I think there's that opportunity. We know there's still some concerns on some of the transit projects and some of the categoricals. Nothing's off the table. If you want to move some of those, I think you can make some small movements. We're hoping, though, that we'll get to something so that now the board can start debating, discussing, and trying to move forward with it as well. But I do want to say more than anything, thank you for staying with the program. Thank you for continuing to have the discussions. I think we've seen the working group between the CAC and the TMC have brought a lot, shown that if we start focusing and try to really get to somewhere, we can do it. And you're all leaders in the community, and we appreciate your voice on the board. So thanks again.
Thank you very much. We are entering into item number 4 now on our agenda, and Paki will kick us off, and then there will likely be some infill of information, I suppose, from our TMC representative and any of our CAC members that have been present for those deliberations as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For this agenda item, I was only going to do a recap on the board meeting, and I believe both board members have covered that, so I don't have any further information to add.
Okay. Thank you. I will see where I have a hand up, Ramon.
Sorry there, Tom. Yes, it was actually on the previous item with General Maxima. I don't know if you're entertaining any questions from him or we've moved on.
No, feel free.
Okay, so General Maxwell, this is Ramon Ganders. Thanks for being here this morning or this afternoon, sorry. And I guess the question I have for you, you had mentioned about giving you a recommendation if we thought maybe the half-cent was not enough. And I wasn't sure if that's a discussion that our committee is going to have, or is that something that you alone as the RTA board will do? Just because as I see things going here, we're always short for money, it seems like, and we're robbing Peter to pay Paul. I was just wondering if that's something you do need to hear from us, or is that something that the board will take up separately?
Well, and I'll ask the executive director to get in here with me as well if I misspeak too far out of line on this one. But the fact of the matter is we have not taken a lot of consideration of making a change. I've been a pretty strong advocate. If we get really close to near, the perfect thing and it is something like a 0.6, 0.55, why would we not at least have that discussion? Not saying that that's going to be the direction that the board would choose to go. But what I don't want the CAC not to consider is if there are we're conceivably within a couple $100,000 of trying to get this thing across the finish line, and we're still seeing proposals to make big weighing changes. I think that's a discussion to have. I do believe that the best times to have it is when you start talking about some of the other policy proposals that are out there. I'd like to say that as soon as you have the plan, thank you for your service. You can go back to not having to sweat these meetings. But the reality is there's still a lot more, I think, that we're going to be turning to the Citizens Advisory Committee for in order to get this across the finish line. And some of that are, I know there's at least a proposal of several different policies that might go into place. And some of it could be, hey, here's what we're forwarding you. This is what we've come to consensus on. It's not perfect. We think this would be better. And if that means we'd have to consider going to a higher thing, I think that's a conversation that the board can have. I don't know if Supervisor Scott or the executive director have any other opinions in that one, but I really don't want to see it get in the way of where you are right now.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ted. I would like to remind the committee that we've been saying all along that the draft plan that we provide will be made up of projects and buckets, but it'll also be made up of explanations and policy considerations and or anything of advisory status that the committee might feel is needed for the board to finally put together a successful plan. Supervisor Scott.
Thank you, Chair McGovern. I would echo what General Maxwell said because it goes back to the overarching point that I made in my remarks at the beginning of the meeting, which is that you should not be inhibited in terms of your efforts to achieve consensus and collaboration. And I also think that it's healthy for us, the RTA board, to have different options to discuss.
Thank you, Supervisor.
The only thing I would add, thank you both for that. The only thing I would add is that I agree with General Maxwell that the first step in the process is to really identify what we can afford with the half cent. And then step two, if we had more, what would we do with that? So keeping those two conversations separate, I think it just helps moving things along. Trying to combine those two conversations, I think makes it a little bit more difficult.
Agree with that. We have a clear responsibility, and I intend for us to reach the finish line on that initial responsibility, which is to report back to the board how to spend a half-cent sales tax. We will continue, and I think from what I've heard about scheduling in the next board meeting in July, if we have policy issues, including half-cent or more, and any of the other suggestions that we might have, that we'll work on those after we get this initial list of projects and categoricals forwarded to the board, as we've been saying all along. So I think, again, consensus is our primary objective, and I'm hopeful that we can do that. Certainly in some cases where we change funding of one area, we'll need to be aware that that will make a change somewhere else, and we should be prepared to identify where the other counterbalancing change would be, and justification for that, so that the full committee can try to weigh in and reach consensus on it. So let's move on to item number 5. And this is where we're going to specifically begin to take a look at the alternative proposal that has been discussed at our last meeting, and for which you've received information in your packet as well. So Paki, do you want to kick us off and give us kind of a reminder of where we are?
Sure, Mr. Chair. All of you received in your packet these slides, so I'm not going to spend too much time on them. I just wanted to remind you of some of the things we wanted to highlight about each of the elements. The multimodal corridors must be named for RTA statute. Safety enhancements that include intersections and pedestrian crossings, active transportation enhancements, environmental enhancements, which include drainage, landscaping, congestion reduction, transit enhancements, including facility and movement enhancements. I know you guys will be speaking in more detail about these. And then just one of the things that came up at the last meeting during cost estimation, the RTA will be identifying which portions of the corridor projects address each component. So, for example, X amount of the project will include safety, X amount will include active, X amount will include capital maintenance. So you'll all have that discussion today. And then in terms of the plan elements, you'll be going over those in more detail today. But the CAC adopted framework details, as you know, corridor projects are at 1.12 billion. We have 100 million reserved in contingency. That's per RTA statutes. 230 million for the deferred 4 projects. These cannot be used for new elements or sub-elements. For safety, again, these are the allocations we had discussed previously, 150 million for that, active transportation at 90, environmental 30 million, transit 510 million. And then we've got the administrative costs at 110 million, and this includes 10 million for the small business assistance program, 23 million for the administrative services that are required by the RTA statutes, and then the 77 million for debt service that's allowed by the RTA statutes. The total of all of this is 2.34 billion, and then 1.9 billion is what's available for the new programming. So the multimodal corridor at 1.12 billion, as you all know, was allocated by the RTA board for new improvements. The CAC adopted framework, that's the spreadsheet that you all received in your packet. And the ad hoc PMC working group ordered these in the following ranking orders. Capacity enhancements was number 1. The total of those projects were 482.2 million. The number 2 priority was operational projects at 81.6 million. Number 3 was new roadway connections at 135 million. And then modernization was the 4th one at 457.2 million. As you all know, at the June 14th ad hoc TMC working group meeting, the feedback that we received was that there were no more significant changes deemed necessary from that framework. And then, as you heard today from both board members at the June 22nd RTA board feedback that just occurred last Thursday, the plan is fiscally constrained and any proposed adjustments required kind of a give and take approach. And that's what we were hoping you to consider today.
Yeah, we have all of the elements as we went through last week, still available here for us to be looking at when we get to that point. But yeah,
Keep going.
we don't need to
Next.
go through them. No, go ahead.
Listed in there was contingency as a statutory requirement. I hadn't heard that before.
No, Mr. Chair, if I may, the RTA statute allows contingency, and the $100 million is based on that statute that it's allowed to have that amount as a contingency.
Not required.
Not required.
That would imply it's required.
It didn't say that. I think it says, I'm not sure what it said, but it didn't say required. You can go back, double check.
Said required.
Why don't you go back, Pocky, if you don't mind?
Yeah, I'm just looking for the.
It says permissible, I believe, but double check.
Crystal, can you go back please to one more?
Go back.
What forward?
You had it right.
And if anyone sees a clicker, let me know.
Yeah, so it says reserve, but yes, it's permissible.
Okay, good. Now, I think it'd be a good time for us, since we've refreshed our memories about kind of the plan in front of us, to get a walkthrough of the alternative proposal that we've been talking about earlier. So, Carolyn, how does your group want to make that presentation? And Crystal, if you could put up there the first page of the alternative proposal.
I guess I would say I picked the short straw to start off, and then hopefully my group members, our rump group members, will kick in. So I guess I can start, and I actually prepared something, which I don't usually do, but I didn't want to forget anything. But first, I want to thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just want to extend our thanks to the board and actually all the jurisdictions, the TMC and their staffs, and how much work they've done, and we really appreciate it. So and thanks for coming in person and being on screen to join us. Yep. Thank you. We've been meeting as the CAC for over 5 years to create what is called on the RTA's website as the People's Plan. Over these years, we have all shared our views on a variety of transportation issues. A small group of us got together last week to attempt to coalesce these various viewpoints. We are pleased to present today a proposal that we believe incorporates those views. The group consists of Bruce Wright, Moss, Arlen Colton, Mel Cohen, and me. We've had great, and as a CAC, we've had great collaboration when we have been able to have the back and forth discussions. For example, when our committee membership changed after members resigned and new members were appointed, there were requests to revisit our guiding principles to ensure that as a committee, there was full ownership of them. We had many productive discussions on our guiding principles on which we found consensus. This proposal in front of that I will be proposing is better aligned with those guiding principles than the staff proposal. We also feel that it is in alignment with what the RTA board directed. Our CAC has had a lot of discussion about two top priorities. The most important is the need for safety, the need to build more safety measures into our transportation network, and that includes all of the modes of travel. The other is transit, to have a transit system that will provide incentives to increase ridership and reduce congestion. This proposal attempts to address both of these in an equitable way. We have also submitted to the CAC suggestions on some policy issues for the board to consider, understanding, of course, that policies are set only by the RTA board. We hope to get a full discussion on those, but I want to point out a couple here that are relevant to our budget discussion today. One, investment in additional public transit should be prioritized, with monies directed to HCT, high-capacity transit projects, to regional work sites, to schools, medical facilities, sports and entertainment hubs, et cetera. The goal should be to encourage and incentivize the use of high-capacity transit to help relieve regional congestion, improve safety, improve mobility, and reduce carbon emissions. Our other policy consideration that we would like to talk about is all named projects should have an appropriate contingency within the scope of the project budget for cost increase due to factors such as inflation, change orders, and other conditions. The categorical unnamed buckets have a built-in contingency. When the pot is depleted, no more projects. So the categories should not be further penalized by an overall contingency off the top. We've been looking at the staff, what the staff has prepared for quite a while, and the chair has encouraged other proposals. Up until now, only one person has stepped up, and we've all seen Moss's proposal. What our group did is to look at both the proposals, and this is our attempt to craft a third hybrid that we hope can have a real discussion and perhaps find consensus. And as I mentioned, Moss was also on our small group discussion. In a nutshell, we kept the named roadway project budget whole without removing any of the projects that TMC and the ad hoc committee proposed. However, in this corridor bucket, we have added a couple of things. $230 million for the deferred road projects because, well, they're roads, but also the categories in 2006 got swept by the board when the revenues came in low. We've talked about that before. We kept the full bus pullouts budget whole at 10 million, but we placed the budget line item under roadways, as there's been lots of discussion about the fact that these pullouts provide safety and congestion relief. And finally, we moved $70 million for the city's high capacity transit priority project, number 3661, the Tucson Mall to downtown, from the roads category to the transit category as a named project, as the CAC voted unanimously to do in January. And now it's the city's HCT priority. I also want to note, I saw some emails going on, that the HCT projects, both of them are ranked high by the CAC, number 3 and number 4 out of the original 108 projects. So we suggest that the full TMC or the board look at these issues and deal with it by the following. One, look at all the corridor projects and find ways to reduce scopes, and or identifying non-RTA funds to contribute, and or prioritizing the project list. It's not currently in priority order, and removing projects from the bottom of the priority list. And just a note that when the TMC ad hoc was trying to trim $180 million for the roadway corridor budget to get to 1.12 billion, they were having a lot of discussions about that. And then the city manager came back with revisions to the city's proposal. They reduced scopes on some, found alternative funding for another, and moved 2 modernization projects into the categoricals with a total savings of 175 million in just city projects. So they basically took care of almost the entire shortfall. So, and finally, I want to note that after we got Pocky's side-by-side comparison document, we revised the transit continuation of service to 370 million as per her note. With what we have done, we've developed a budget that gives a higher priority to transit, including one HCT named project, and provides modest increases to safety as well as the other categories. We think that what we put together hits all the marks. And I would ask any of my non-committee members, I mean, my small group members.
Carolyn, can you remind us?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
What these three are?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
At
You
least
showed
walk
them.
us through the one that represents your proposal.
Right, the proposal that we have before you is the bottom right, 621-2023 proposal. And we've got, I mean, you can read them, but I think that these, well, and then we have what came out of the working group and in their past work. And then, and to remember that, well, this isn't the TM, this is what we have seen for the ballot, but TMC ad hoc only looked at the road projects. They did not consider any categoricals. That was our task. And, you know, when we have talked about the categoricals, it seemed like we had needs that weren't being met. So something has to give. So these, and then we also added the 2006 RTA budget summary. And, you know, just for comparison, like what we've moved from transit in 2006, there was 25%. With this ballot proposed framework, transit is in at 22%, and we have it at 30% in our consensus proposal, or I would like to think our consensus proposal. But, and then for roadways, 56 in 2006, and in this working group, it's 48 because the deferred projects are not included, and ours is 1.217. So ours is a little higher, but with the caveats of what we put in there that we thought was appropriate. And if you want to go to the next slide, we can actually look at that.
Can I just clarify that last point? So at 1.1 billion for the basic amount of the projects, and the 230, you'd be comparing this 1.2 to about a 1.35 or so $1 billion.
987. 90, we have a side by side, we can pull that up as well, but it's 987.
Okay, go ahead.
That's really
There
it.
you
If
go.
you want to go to the side by side.
There we go. So that's the 987 we were just referring to. So if the 230 is included in the total, there's only 987 left for any new corridor projects.
Okay, do the other members of the non-committee want to add anything or any further comments? Bruce?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee for considering this. As we stated from the outset, the idea was to try to build consensus among the different views that have been expressed around the table, and also to relate this to the values that we adopted at the beginning. From my approach from the very beginning of this committee, I was concerned about two things. One was that we put attention to major corridors and the ability to move people from one place to another efficiently throughout the region. And that included addressing these major roadway projects that would complete corridors and provide that kind of linkage between home, work, play, and the other parts of our community. And the second was the same thing with transit, to be able to provide a transit system that would take us in the direction of high capacity transit that would again do the same thing, move us from home to work, to school, to hospitals, and so on. And looking at the plan that was brought forward by the TMC and the ad hoc committee, I didn't feel as though the issue of high capacity transit was given sufficient attention and value. And for that reason, I participated in this process to make that statement and to make that commitment as we move forward. I think that's absolutely critical for all the reasons that we stated in the policy statement that Carolyn summarized. It's not only the ability to be efficient and safe, but it also addresses other issues such as land development and dealing with climate change and carbon emissions and all those kinds of things. I was also struck during the course of the presentations by the jurisdictions that the city of Tucson came forward and said that high capacity transit was a very, very high priority for them. And again, I didn't see that reflected in the work of the working committee and the ad hoc committee when it was brought forward. So I think this is a reasonable approach. I hearken back to when I was involved in the first CAC for RTA 1, which I think has been an overwhelming success. One of the big breakthrough issues for us was the modern streetcar. And it signaled that we as a community were making a commitment to moving people around with an alternative mode of transportation and dealing at the high capacity level. I think this plan needs to take the next step forward. At the last meeting of the committee, people raised all kinds of issues about high capacity, whether we could do a dedicated lanes, whether we could afford modern streetcar. I don't know the answers to that, but I believe that a community committed to improving high capacity transit can find the ways that fit this community and the context of this environment and achieve that goal. And there are plenty of communities around the United States from which we can pick best practices and try to find a pathway to make that happen. So with that, that's why I am in support of this current proposal.
Could I get a clarification on the transit element? 691,670,000 of which is the add back, I guess, of 3661, the high capacity transit project. Of the other 620 or 621 that's proposed, that represents about 100 million more than the current 510, right? So can you kind of tell us, because I don't really see it here, as to, as you've given different names, I think, to the sub elements than we have. Can you let us know where the big differences are? I mean, $100 million of difference. I'd just like to have the committee be aware of where those new emphasis might be.
It might be better if we went to the slide that has.
Yeah, let's go back to their first slide.
No, actually, there's a follow-on to the other slide gets put in with all the explanations
Budget.
here.
Okay.
Next one. Oops.
It's before the
Go
slide
forward.
you were. No, they're not in the slides. That's why we're having to pull up the document separately. So hang on one second.
There you
There
go.
you go. Yeah,
Oh.
if you can enlarge it, Crystal, please.
Well, and just to remind, what I said before is that because we were doing some math on 30% for the transit for a continuation of services at 357, then we did do this adjustment after your document came out preparing it, Pocky, and we had that number wrong. So I do have copies of, and then what we did, we just took money in the transit from other transit, just reduce those other numbers, except of course for the high capacity transit, but for the other transit sub elements, we just took a little off of those. So that particular transit sub element has some changes, and I did bring copies. of
Okay,
those.
so, but that's
But yes,
fairly
right.
minor. It's only
Correct.
$13 million.
Yeah, only 13 million.
Pocket change.
I think Miles could probably
That's the
explain this
difference
best.
you have there.
So, yeah, Tom, just for, we were kind of going back and forth on that, right? And so one thing that we all recognize, and actually,
Amanda, hang on a second. Can everyone online hear her? I don't
They don't-
think she
she doesn't
has
have
a.
I have a,
mic.
just hold it right here. Coming in loud and clear, Tom?
Dangerous.
Yeah. You're gonna. So actually, this kind of was I had a conversation with some folks and flagging the operational enhancements. And so we were suggesting, and it's not reflected here, to reduce that quite a bit, but then to like 20 million for that and have that spread more across the capacity and new transit connections. So it's more about that capital improvement for the public transit element. And with one thing I'd like to note about the public transit is we all know that we've heard many times about how Centran's doing their operational analysis, and that plan should be coming out soon. And so our thinking is that, this is again, like bumper rails is kind of how I've been trying to describe this plan is these are the bumper rails. And then once we get some of that information, get the opportunity to consult Suntran based on this brand new fresh data, that could help us to right size what these specific sub-element amounts, how that pencils out. And just, Carolyn and Bruce, I think you all really nailed it. I also just wanted to kind of share this committee's heard me talk about Move Tucson before, and I just think it's a good litmus test for what the region is demanding, since there really hasn't been another public outreach effort to date, at least to this thoroughness and in-depth questions. So just to kind of like level set where Tucsonans responded is that aside from road maintenance, public transportation and biking are the top two, or among the top two within the top 3 priorities for investment in our community. They also have a lot of great stats about where our road network is and why spending potentially 62% of this RTA Next budget specifically on roadways seems out of line with what the specific needs. And we all know Tucson, you can't get from Marana to Sahuarita without going through Tucson. And so this is why I think it's also relevant to think about it in this way. And that this analysis found that by 2045, without building or expanding our streets, 58% of our network capacity will be used during peak travel periods, meaning we're not going to be hurting for roads at this time. And so given the priorities that Tucsonans have flagged, and that, and that analysis, it kind of signals that there is an opportunity and there is a need for other types of investment, especially as Carolyn pointed out, how there's been underinvestment in these other categories for the last several decades because of the budget shortfalls. Some other stats I just want to highlight for kind of grounding some of these numbers and where this need is that 45% of the major roads in Tucson are missing sidewalks on one or both sides of the street. 92% of major roads have greater than a quarter mile between safer crossing opportunities. Despite population growing by 6.6% between 2005 and 2018, traffic volumes are down in most areas of the city. Only 48% of the total capacity of major streets is used during the evening rush hour. And only 7% of streets in Tucson are congested at the busiest time of day. And then finally, just a couple thoughts on safety. More than 1,700 people, and this is a few years back now, were seriously injured or killed on Tucson streets. And 72% of serious fatal crashes occurred on major streets. So those are our regional arterials. Pedestrian serious injury fatalities rates increased by 90% during the time period of 2014 to 2018. And we know that that's only gotten worse. So as Move Tucson concludes, it's becoming more dangerous to walk and bike. And I really attribute that personally to the divestment in other modes of transportation. And I think that this proposal really helps to put that priority in spending kind of back to make sure that it's a transportation network that works for everyone. So thank you.
Thank you. Arlie.
Thanks. I'm not going to go into any weeds at all. But I will say just how my partner addressed his vows when we got married after I spoke for 15 minutes. So the point that I just want to make, and it's this part, the numbers which we talk about now. It's also these proposed policies which we were invited by a number of you on the board, Rex and Ted in particular, but others as well, and our chair, to talk about things that we thought were important enough that we ought to just raise them as recommendations or suggestions to the board as well. But in terms of the numbers, my interest was in trying to get to some consensus. Having a split vote coming out of the CAC in something that is this critical was, to me, yeah, we get it through, but at the end of the day, this was not viable. And we needed to find a way to, without radically shifting too much stuff, create a plan that at least at these beginning stages to go forward with that had greater consensus. So that's it. That's all I got to say right now. I reserve my right to speak a little later.
I thought so. Mel, you're the only one who hasn't spoken from the group. Do you have anything further you'd like to add for us?
Sure, I would further support the need to move people from work to home to where they want to go and at the critical hours. And just having more, when you look at every other community, when you add roads, people fill them up. It's just what happens. And without some alternative that addresses those issues, we're not going to make a big change within the community. And I see one glaring absence of any transportation for large parts of Tucson, especially the east side, that we're able to move people, and without alternative concepts for how they're going to get to work. And what I haven't seen is, I've been told that the long range plan has considered the park and ride a complete failure. And if it is, I just don't know why. And I've been frustrated with finding out what is the cause of that. I heard a great there's a podcast called Hidden Brain, and it addressed the issue of why things don't work sometimes. And ultimately, there's a drag. There's some obstacle, and I don't think we've addressed what's that obstacle to improving the community's transportation system. And I've been asking for a long time, what are we looking from? What have other communities done successfully? And we haven't given that very much support. And so the alternative that suggests we need to look at transportation as an alternative that can work. It isn't going to work everywhere in this community, but there are certainly aspects that have that potential to make a change. And we know from what was done the first time, it worked. When they had some insight that let's make some change. And I think that's very important.
Thanks for that. One of the statements you made, this is not coming from me, this is me projecting what I heard the first time around and what I have heard from the same sorts of people ever since, really. And you're talking about spending much more money in order to enhance the ridership of Suntran. And what are we basing that on?
Well, that's the problem. I haven't seen anything that suggests anything more than just adding more buses at nights and weekends. And I don't know that that concept is going to work. And so that allocation of money, I don't know is the answer to what we're suggesting.
Well, I guess that was kind of the basis of my question before this about the transit proposal. Can we get any more specificity as to how each of those large bumps up in enhancement, ridership, et cetera, what those might look like? We know that staff and the jurisdictions, primarily the city, had told us that 370 million or so covers us for the next 20 years for those enhancements that represent the current system. So the current system is a great enhancement over the 2005 system. So now the question is, what does the 2026 system look like that's, greater than what we have today and, or we would have in 2026.
Mr. Chairman, can I address that a little bit?
Yes.
He can defer, sure.
So I think the point is that we're not suggesting that the allocations that were made by the TMC and the ad hoc committee to transit should be reduced. But that is maintaining basically the status quo, a system as it currently exists. And we're really saying that moving to high capacity transit is a different approach. It's a way of looking at moving large numbers of people through their activities during the course of the day. And the city's proposed high transit capacity projects are a start in making that happen. On top of that, in the effort to build consensus, I think Moss addressed that she proposed putting additional monies in to address other aspects of the transit system to improve safety and those kinds of things. And that's why those additional dollars are beyond the 70 million for the high transit capacity project.
And beyond the 70 additional million above the 370 for the existing enhancements,
That's
the
correct.
existing conditions.
And
Mr. Chair, if I may, I'm sorry. Mr. Maxwell said he needs to leave. If you don't mind, allow him to chime in before he leaves. Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Farhad, and thank you, Tom. I just actually don't have any comments. It's not my place to comment. I just want to thank you again for your hard work. Wish you the best of luck. I'm sorry I have to step aside, but I've got a meeting in a minute, and I knew the way I could spend the most time with you is if I joined online. So appreciate it. Thank you for all your service and best of luck.
All right.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
If I could,
Mr. Chair, it might be helpful if we look at that side by side and go down the list. I think it
Chris, you want
provides a little bit more perspective as well.
It's perfect. I have a couple of comments. One is thank you for putting back and suggesting the side by side, because I'm very struck by the analytical framing of the side by side, because it's an alternative proposal for our committee to be considering, and it's framed as cuts. And so I just want the committee to be sort of sensitive to exactly how it's presented to us, because I think the group has done a tremendous job of reprioritizing appropriately the categories and the amount of money that should go into it. And so I was really struck by that analytical framing and presentation, that it's presented to us as cuts. And as a committee, it really it presupposes that the working group recommendation is the recommendation. And I applaud the ad hoc group for taking an alternative approach that changes the alternative priorities reflected in the alternative proposal are exactly what it should be, which is shifting people out of their by themselves cars. We've been talking about that from the very beginning. It's not radical. It's not radical. It is a consensus building approach in my mind. And I want to make the point, the clear point, that the framing of this frames it as cuts negatively. And it's not that. It is a competing proposal that has different priorities that I think are reflective of what we've been talking about all along. This is a 20-year plan that predicts, we have no idea where we're going to be at from a transportation standpoint. We've seen radical changes to how we live and work in the last 3 years. We have no idea what's going to happen in 20. And to have the plan that we propose really prioritize and put more and more money into capacity for vehicles without reprioritizing those funds to be on moving larger number of people together out of their cars is really, I think, how we should be viewing this from a committee and from a community. And so those are my 2 points. Thank you.
I think just one quick response, Chris. Appreciate the perspective. Remember that the column on the left represents what the TMC developed as part of that working group effort. But furthermore, it reflects what the both what the board had asked us to start with, as well as what we had come up with as categoricals. And in order for us to fund, as I said at the beginning of the meeting, in order for us to fund more into an element, something does have to be cut. So showing it as a cut may feel like an insult to the alternative.
I'm not insulted at
But
all.
I'm not.
The point is
I'm not
that there's no insult at all. The point is it's a negative framing, Mr. Chair. That's the point.
All right, point taken.
Could I make a clarification? To clarify one point, I just want to remind you that neither the TMC or the TMC ad hoc dealt with categoricals. It was just the roadway budget. So, so they didn't have anything these are just numbers that we have been given by staff. And the only thing they dealt with in terms of categoricals was moving a couple of projects over to them, and then treating the HCT project, the high capacity transit, like a little hot potato, and, not wanting to deal with it and throwing it back over to the transit committee. So, just, it hasn't been done. And unless we're going to meet again at the transit committee, subcommittee, it sounds like this is where the hot potato landed.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may, and I might ask Terry or Carmine to also chime in. So the exercise that the working group took on was a comprehensive review of all the elements to develop a fiscally constrained plan. So they did look at, obviously, the list of projects. That was item 1 on their list. And then when they were able to hit the target budget, then they did look at all the elements and move some of the projects into the elements. But I think that's probably not a fair assessment of what they recommended. What they recommended was the dollar amounts for the elements as a guideline to achieve a fiscally constrained plan, and then left the actual sub-elements of each buckets to CAC to discuss and debate further. They didn't get into the sub-elements per se, but the dollar amounts you see on the left-hand side were part of that fiscally constrained discussion by the working group. Their recommendation, their goal was, if you look at the spreadsheet, their goal was to make sure that they hit that $2.34 billion. And then, as you recall, at the CAC meeting, the motion that was made, which is with a split vote, was to accept the working group's recommendation. So I just want to make sure, for the record, everybody knows that that was the motion, that was the split vote. But what you see on the left-hand side is what was approved by the CAC.
I have Ava online, and then Abby, and then Justine.
Yeah, my understanding is the TMC never voted on the categories. But that aside, I just want to make my statement based on what's been presented. I've been on the CAC for a year now, and that feels like forever, but I realize that I'm totally indebted to the old timers on this committee, and I'd like to say thank you to them, and following the lead of our distinguished guests today. So when I joined about a year ago, we had to fight to be able to discuss the guiding principles, and we rewrote the principles and we used them to create a ranking tool. And in regards to some of the statements made about negative framing, we haven't seen the list in comparison with the original list that we created based on the ranking tool that was based on the guiding principles that we discussed, right? So because of that process failure, I really feel like we don't know where this plan that has supposedly been vetted and gone through, where it stands up in regard to the priorities that we identified. And now that I'm seeing this alternative plan, I'm seeing some of those priorities that we had consensus about, that we established consensus about, that we fought to establish consensus about, reintegrated into the plan, okay? And I want to say, you know, again, I sound like a broken record, but Tucson is in the top 13 of most dangerous metropolitan areas for people on foot. And Tucson is also the third fastest warming city in the West, okay? We can't do things like status quo, you know, the way we did before, et cetera, right? There is a time, and the time is now. So I just want to say that this alternative plan, it doesn't satisfy me. It's not enough for me, but I would absolutely vote yes on it for the sake of consensus. And because it's the first time that I've seen something where I can say, look, this is the move that we made. These are the changes that we made in order to do something that responds to the residents of these communities. And without this, you know, alternative plan that people have worked really hard to be able to produce something that, you know, looks like it could garner consensus. I really appreciate that. And, you know, I'm sad that it had to come down to like the 11th hour here. So, you know, it's not good enough for me, but I would get behind it. And I just want to really commend the work that I see, the intentionality that I see going into this.
Thank you. Abby.
Thanks. Thank you to the people who put this together. I am not a numbers person, so I appreciate the numbers, but more than that, I appreciate the explanation and would hope that anything like this would be accompanied by our guiding principles, which I printed and brought with me, and also by more comments on this. I do want to say, Tom, in response to your question about where the money goes in public transportation, I'm not a numbers person, but I am a facts person, and I am a very detailed note taker. And I'm looking at my notes from the February 28th Transit Subcommittee meeting, which was one of only a few meetings that we had, which was enormously frustrating, every single one of these meetings. But at this meeting, we had representatives from Suntran who told us that they would have more information in June from their COA. And I want to see that. And I've been asking for that. And I don't think that we should approve any plan until we see those numbers from Suntran about what they need. And I think if we don't do that, we're guessing. And I don't want to guess. I want to be accountable to the public. I want to be accountable to ourselves. This new proposal makes me nervous because to me, it's just a bunch of numbers. And without further guarantee that we are connecting facts and numbers. And I think Moss said this time again, but, you know, documented regional needs that we have from things like Move Tucson, otherwise we're guessing. I want to see how that all applies. So I'm not willing to say that I'm willing to support this or any other plan at this point, but I appreciate all the accompanying policy comments. And I want to see those numbers from Suntran. I want that information to inform this plan. So thank you.
Justine.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I just wanted to just share my appreciation for this working group's, the ad hoc committee's work on this. And while it does not go far enough for me, I mean, I want it to be a more radical sort of plan, but you know, keeping in mind what Rex said at the beginning of this meeting is kind of really thinking about something that can garner consensus and wider support. I do appreciate this, and I was really concerned when I saw the 2006 plan, and then just saw those numbers shift more towards you know, a car-centric approach to transportation, and that felt really backwards thinking to me. And so I'm really appreciative to see those numbers bump up, to see the shift, and not as Chris said, kind of cuts, but just a shifting and of our priorities and a real forward-thinking prioritization for our community's safety and sort of the equity that we have, have been kind of tasked with thinking about as part of our goals. So anyway, I appreciate this. I also am with Abby. I think some additional numbers, to Tom's point of, he's asking about, what that looks like, what transportation, public transportation and high capacity transport looks like. But I also, think that we kind of know what, Moss made a point about what car transportation looks like. And I see that in real life as well. I live right off of Broadway in the Sunshine Mile where all this lovely road widening happened and the traffic did not return. I think people are really looking for alternatives. So anyway, I just want to support this plan or a plan like it, or just this direction that we're taking. So I appreciate it. So thank you.
Okay. Farhad, before I ask you to weigh in, the question I asked earlier is kind of what I want us to also be focused on here, and that is if we increase from the proposal on the left by decreasing, and the proposal is to decrease the corridor projects. Have you come up with which projects should be cut? I know, Carolyn, you mentioned that the jurisdictions should go back and either put more skin in the game or rescope their projects in order to meet the new budget. I don't have much confidence that that would reduce the cost of all those projects to 987 million. But I think we do have to answer the question of exactly how do we pay for those further enhancements of those both safety and transit. But since we're talking about transit now, I think that's a key. I would like to kind of get beyond the question of the high capacity transit project, though. And I just wonder if I could ask the group, how many of you believe that we should restore 3661 as a named transit project?
It's from Tohono to Die. It's from
Tohono to Die to downtown.
Oh, that's the high capacity transit.
Yeah, so the one that we had on our list before was to the airport, from downtown to the airport. And Sam Credio from City Transportation is here if we have any questions about this. I would like to just get a sense from the group. People in here, I can see your hands. Perhaps those of you online could do the same. Is that something that the committee can, just say we want, and we want it to be in whatever plan we have?
Could I make one quick clarification? Because I think the number here is misleading about the roadway difference. So if you actually go between them based on the named roadway project amounts, the difference between what staff have put forward versus what our little group has put forward is actually 153 million. So you can actually add those up, or maybe I'm doing something wrong here, but it's not almost $1 billion. So if you add 157, 1.6 million, 25 and 5.5, that doesn't get you to 987. So the reason this is like this, so I'm not sure where that 987 million number is coming from.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may let me go over the side by side, and if the numbers are incorrect, that's fine. We can all pull out our calculators and make the correction. But I think it really goes back to the conversation that Mr. Maxwell touched on it, Supervisor Scott touched on it. So ultimately, our goal is to make sure that any recommendation that moves forward is responsive to what we currently have as still a draft. So the comparisons are compared to the draft that's currently on the left-hand side. So again, feel free to pull out your calculators, but help each other out here to make that perspective. So capacity enhancements, currently, as we understand in the draft plan, is I think we don't have it written down here, but it's $147 million more than the 335. So by definition, and this goes back to what you said, Carolyn, by definition, the jurisdictions would have to go back and look at their projects and identify $147 million worth of adjustments, unless this group has a recommendation how to do that. Same thing with operational. Operational looks like $1.6 million difference. Bus pullouts, that was moved from safety to this element. So there's no, so that's a good example of no change. We're just moving things around. New roads, currently it's 135. In order to get to 110, we have to identify $25 million worth of adjustments. 452 was the modernization, and the adjustments needed there are $5.5 million, so that's not as significant. So add up the totals, whatever that total is, those adjustments are needed if we're going to consider at least that element something that we can endorse and move forward with. And I go back to your question, Mr. Chair, that these are specific corridors, so we need to have a specific list of projects that would be impacted if there's a recommendation to do so. One of the things that I think everybody recognizes, and I believe Mr. Maxwell chimed in early on, again, this is that give and take exercise. So unless we know what gives, then it's hard to introduce something new to the conversation. So I would recommend you start there. Identify what are the things that you want to make adjustments. Call it what you will, but now you have a bucket of funds that you can reallocate to other elements if that's where you want to go. But not having that understanding of where those funds are coming from, I think it really makes it difficult and puts things out of context. Same thing applies to all those other elements as well. Not knowing where the funding comes from, in my opinion, makes it much more difficult exercise to decide what are you going to increase.
Okay, there are a couple of foundational differences that would be helpful to get a feel for the committee's support of, because those, depending on how they go, may move us closer to a consensus on either this plan or another or something in between. So bear with me, humor me. People in the room, do you want to ensure that the high capacity transit project I mentioned is included in our transit bucket? Yes. All those in favor, are you okay with that? Raise your hands. Please.
Please leave your hands up so that Ramona can take the tally.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. It's either a vote or just a visual. So we don't need to do that. Just a visual.
Don't need to count it.
I guess I'm with Abby. I'm not gonna indicate otherwise because I need more information.
Okay, that's fine.
I mean,
I'd like to voice the same concern. It's been unclear to me about what that project's priority is. Mr. Farhat said at the last meeting that the city had withdrawn these high capacity projects from their priority list. That's not what I heard from the city. We have
No,
a here today. I'd like to hear what.
Allow me to clarify it. It's on here as well. So if you recall, the CAC, I believe it was January. If you don't mind, scroll down. Project number 3660, that's from downtown to the airport. That was the project that the CAC recommended to consider. Following that conversation, we have heard from city staff that 3660 is not their priority any longer. 3661 from downtown to Tucson Mall is now their priority. So there was a difference of which one the CAC wanted to discuss further versus which one the city wanted to discuss further. At the working group meeting, City of Tucson proposed to the working group to do not consider 3660 any longer, but consider 3661. The working group recommendation did not include 3661.
And Mr. Chairman, you're asking for our sense on 61, correct?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Could we still hear
Thank you.
from the city first? Or?
Sure. Anything you'd like to add, Sam?
Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Yes, thank you for having me. My name is Sam Credio. I'm the Director of Transportation and Mobility for the City of Tucson. And to answer some of these questions, I would like to just provide a little bit of context, the evolution of our high capacity transit projects. We do have two projects. One is an alignment from downtown to Tohono Tadai near Tucson Mall. The other is from downtown all the way to the airport. In early January, actually January 11th, the RTA staff presented a spreadsheet with all the projects and their rankings. And both of those projects were ranked 3 and 4 respectively by the CAC. Both projects are ranked in our top 10 for City of Tucson projects. January 23rd, the CAC actually made a motion to move the 6th Avenue Ronstadt Transit Center to Tucson International Airport from the draft named project list to the transit sub-element. And then multiple times during that discussion, there was conversation about also moving the dollars with that project to the transit element. At the subsequent transit element subcommittee on February 13th, those projects were not discussed. Also, I should mention that motion was passed 18-2 with 4 abstentions. On April 11th, during the transit subcommittee meeting, those projects were also not discussed. And in fact, that meeting lost quorum, so there was no action taken at that meeting. On May 17th, our city manager, Mr. Ortega, presented to the TMC ad hoc committee, which included members of your committee here, a proposal that the city of Tucson put forward that included reducing the overall cost of the named projects. And one of those items was discussed on moving a $70 million HCT project to the transit sub-elements. The actual alignment of that was not discussed, but our recommendation was to include a $70 million HCT project in the transit buckets. At that meeting, there was not action taken. It was discussed what to do with that transit project. However, at the time, the TMC was not prepared to discuss it, mainly because we had not had an opportunity to discuss the categorical elements. We have only been focused on the named projects. On May 31st, we actually did take action to reduce some of the ADOT projects in order to balance the budget. And we also moved 2 projects to the categoricals, 22nd Street and La Jolla. Again, at that time, no action was taken on the transit elements because we've only been focused on the named projects. And the city of Tucson is still very interested in pursuing a high capacity transit project. I've seen some of the preliminary data for the COA, and both the Oracle and the South 6 alignments are some of our highest ridership in the city of Tucson. In fact, I think it's about 25% of all ridership in the city of Tucson are on those 2 alignments, which align very nicely with our high capacity transit projects. And so I'd be happy to answer any other questions you might have on that topic. Thank you very much.
Okay, so
Any other questions?
so the city's interested in both segments, but there's one that might be a priority. Is that what I'm hearing correctly?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Moss, thank you for that question. So you're right. So all along in that timeline that I provided you, there was not clarity on where those HCT projects were going to land. In the meantime, the city has been working on trying to determine what would be the most feasible project to deliver in the timeframe that we're looking at. And in that time, we have determined that the North Alignment is the project that we could most feasibly deliver and makes the most sense based on the feedback that we've got. So as of right now, that North Alignment is our priority HCT project, and that is what we're proposing when Mr. Ortega gave that presentation on May 17th.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Sam.
Very
I'm
helpful.
assuming because it shows on the proposal today that $70 million within the transit bucket would be for a high capacity transit project, that it is being recommended to us, correct? It seems like there was some question about whether that's included. Here within the room, I sense near consensus for that. I would propose that we move that on and continue to use that assumption that high capacity transit project, as currently the city has prioritized it, our number 3661 would be included in our transit. Okay, there are a number of other issues that I think are foundational to this that are differences, but let me hear from a couple more of our folks online. Jamie, sorry, I know you've had your hand up for a long time and now it looks like it's down.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes, we can. Thanks.
So, Mr. Chair, I guess I do support the high capacity transit. I think it's something potentially innovative that can make a difference based upon Sam's numbers. It looks like it'll be an effective project. I guess my question is that we're spending a lot of money on transit, and I guess this reflects somebody else said earlier, is transit effective in Tucson? We know it's effective in New York City, but I mean, I looked at the SunTrans latest report. They have 25.3 passengers per trip, and they're giving it away for free, and people still don't use the bus. So why is that? If we just throw more money at it, is that going to solve the problem? I don't know if anybody can answer that.
Yes.
I wonder if any of the staff from the city could answer.
I think it can answer it, but they may not have data about the future. So,
Mr. Chair, if I may, again, I'll go back to the long range plan. The purpose of the long range plan is to attempt to answer that question. The long range plan is updated frequently to make adjustments and look at trends and what's happening. So that's really the best tool we have at our disposal. The transit long range plan was completed in 2020. Very extensive surveys from both onboard passengers as well as people who don't use transit. The person who conducted the workshops for that planning exercise is an expert in transit. He attempted to respond to all these questions and answer the questions. So the recommendations you have in the long range plan are well thought out, and in my opinion, from an expert who really understood where do you want to get the most benefit from your investment. So if you look at the recommendations in the long range plan, those are consistent with what we've been talking about so far.
okay.
Sam, Sam is up with you.
Yeah, go ahead, Sam. Did you want to answer that?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd be happy to add to that. So one of the comments I'd like to make is that our ridership on SunTran post-pandemic has returned much faster than any other transit system in the country. So we're definitely doing something right there. You know, in all the studies that I've read and research I've done, the things that drive ridership are the bus has to be safe, clean, reliable, on time, and provide frequent service. And I think that as you invest in frequency, that is definitely a good bang for your buck. The other thing to keep in mind too is that high capacity transit, like a bus rapid transit system, does allow you to get much further, much quicker than on the normal bus system. So again, investment in BRT and high capacity transit is also a great way to drive ridership. That's all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mel?
Could I ask-
Follow up on that question?
Yes, I'd like to know, what is the concept? What are we looking at least today? What are we thinking about when we talk about high capacity transit going north to Sky?
Mr. Chair, Mel, that's a great question. So what we're looking at for high capacity transit on the North Alignment is a bus rapid transit route. We have not selected an alternative, or I'm sorry, we have not selected an alignment. Many of you know that we've conducted a land use planning study called Norte Sur that looked at a planning area along essentially Oracle and Stone on the North Alignment and South 6th along the South Alignment. And so high capacity transit could be light rail, it could be bus rapid transit, it could even be streetcar. And so at this time, we are exploring bus rapid transit up that North Alignment, but preferred alternative route has not been selected yet.
If I could, why would that be any different from buses that we have today that stop at every intersection?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. So bus rapid transit, by definition, would operate in its own right of way. There would be enhanced amenities, enhanced stops, and it would not stop quite as frequently as your typical bus service does. Typically, bus stops are about every quarter mile. And so on a bus rapid transit, you would see those spaced out further because the idea is that you're trying to move a lot of people in a much quicker fashion. And so the fact of it being in its own dedicated right of way, having its own dedicated stops would make it high capacity transit.
Thank you. Hang on just a second. Is that a follow-up? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, just as a comment to add to that, most of you know, my career has been primarily in land use planning, not transportation planning per se. But the connection between, I've taught all of this, the strong connection between land use planning and transportation planning is paramount. And they're symbiotic. When we create something you can count upon, like a bus rapid transit or any other kind of high capacity, which is known stops, you can create investment at those stops where density increases, activity center increases, ultimately ridership increases, and it snowballs on each other. That's over the long haul. And so do I have numbers that sit there and tell you that? No, because I don't keep those things in my head. But that's just the general rule. I think that is an accurate statement from this side of land use planning as opposed to transportation planning.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Arlen, in our Norte Sur equitable transit oriented development land use planning study, that's exactly what we're finding is that investment in high capacity transit does drive land use development. And it's not specific to whether it's streetcar, but also BRT can definitely be a catalyst for development along a high capacity transit route.
Now, if you pick up those BRTs and you move them every 3 weeks, it isn't going to work. They're stationary.
Just like putting tracks in the road.
Okay, you got a few people online that are.
Yeah, Edmund.
Thank you very much. I think my hand's been up for 15 minutes. I think I'm breaking a record, but a couple of things. First of all, I listened to the RTA board meeting from days ago, and the HCT Tohono Tadai to Ronstadt was important. The mayor made that very clear. So Farhad had mentioned a give and take. So, I mean, it's $70 million being added to this. I mean, I'd be curious on what Sam's perspective, and maybe it's now, maybe it's later, is what other projects would the city cut of theirs to come up with the 70 million, number one. Number two, this straw polling piece, I just want to give my blunt opinion. It's not the way we're going to progress in this group. We're already dysfunctional as it is, and to go through straw polling, traditionally in a board meeting, we need to have motions, seconds, you approve it, you discuss it. That's where the information comes. I agree with Chris. I wouldn't want to vote right now. I don't know enough about it. So straw polling, I don't think is the route. In regard to taking a mile high perspective on this, I mean, we've heard a ton about transit. We haven't talked about roads. I mean, I don't know the numbers like Moss, let's say per se, but I'm going to guess like 98% of the people out there getting back and forth in our region are using a car. So, you know, we're seeing cuts of, and I would like to know where more of the cuts are coming from. What I'm guessing from what I'm seeing in the side by side, we're cutting $100 million contingency, which it sounds like the RTA board wanted. New roadways being cut by 25 million, another 147 million for capacity element. That's basically our contingency dollars in case something goes awry. And then we're cutting from roadways another, another $170 million. So I think we need to go back to the cuts. And then I also think we need to keep in mind as we continue to argue this, and we literally could meet probably for the next 3 years and continue to argue and not get something done. We need to keep in mind this is simply a recommendation. So if we move forward and you're aiming for consensus and we move forward and we got it back to the RTA board, it's a recommendation. And then they get to make the decisions from there, you know, even though we've just made a recommendation. So there's my piece after 15 minutes.
Thank you, Edmund.
Hurry back.
Ramon.
So I guess for me, it lies back down to the policy issue of, as Farhead said earlier, you know, where do the cuts come from? Where's the money coming from? And I honestly don't know between the two plans, although I would like to just applaud the alternative a lot. But I feel that we need to have a policy discussion about whether or not the difference here could be 1/10 of a cent to increase. I can't fathom trying to steal money from one pot to the other and say it's consensus. I don't see that. I do echo the comments as well about the Suntran, about the ridership comments. I'd like to see that as well to make a better decision. I'm unfamiliar with Suntran as you know, I've ridden Suntran once in 20 years. And I can't for work. I go from one job site to another for my work. There's no way I could take a Suntran, but I am interested in learning more about it. But I do feel the policy discussion about increasing the ½ cent is important because this is kind of where we are. And maybe it does build consensus to have that discussion. I'm not sure, but I would like to throw that out there.
Okay, thank you, Ramon. Patricia.
Yeah, lots of good comments here. And yeah, I don't think anyone feels ready to throw their full weight behind either of these plans, but I think I'd like to make a motion that we approve the alternative plan and just see where that gets us. So can I make that motion?
I'll second it.
Okay, we're discussing that at this point. I assume that there would be someone certainly among 5 people I can imagine who would move and second that. So let's continue to discuss this. I see that City Manager Ortega is online and has his hand up. Mike, would you like to weigh in?
Maybe he was trying to do
Maybe
the
you were
thumbs up.
just voting on the.
He was voting. He was gonna vote.
Well, if you're still there, haven't taken a bio break, then jump back in if you would like.
Tom, can we get some guidance since we just had a motion and a second on how long more discussion is going to be allowed before we have a vote?
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah. As long as people want to talk about it, I think we need to, until the comments become so repetitive that it's obvious that we're either stalling or we don't like it or we love it. I think we'll just continue to discuss.
Hey, Tom, can you hear me now?
Yes, you found the mute button, Mike.
Yeah, no, it's just monkeying around. You hit enough buttons, eventually you'll get one to work, so thank you. So if appropriate, I'd like to make a couple of comments, Tom, if you're up for it.
Yes, feel free.
Thank you, and I will echo, I heard Supervisor Scott and General Maxwell's comments. I would echo my thanks to the group for really putting the energy and effort into this whole thing, so thank you. I think Edmund had made a comment about now that we made a recommendation to move that high capacity transit from the corridor projects to the transit element. If you recall, the basis for that was us going through and rescoping and quite frankly, cutting back a variety of city projects in order to what I'll use the term balance the corridor projects. So I think if you look at the basis for the recommendation, we already cut significant dollars in city projects on the corridor side with the expectation that we would move certain projects into categoricals. Specifically, I believe it was safety and transit. So when you ask, what are we willing to give up? I think go back and look at what we've already cut back, and then you all can see the energy and effort we've put into this. Happy to continue to have the dialogue. You heard at the RTA board meeting, the HCT is a priority for us, and we will continue to put it pretty high on the list. And happy to go through that. I know Sam went through a pretty good history lesson on how it evolved, but quite frankly, the expectation when we made those recommendations back in May was that $70 million would go over to the transit element, and we didn't talk at all about, nor did we make a recommendation about where the funding would come or if it would go from the corridor to the transit or any other pieces. We just suggested that that's probably where it belonged. So I just wanted to make sure that you all were clear on that. At least that was the perspective and the spirit and intent of what we brought to the game. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. Sam, can you add anything to that?
That was a negative.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Jamie. And then Moss and Bruce.
Okay, so we've got a motion on the floor to approve the alternate. And I guess I would vote against it for basically a number of reasons. I don't think we can continue to rob Peter to pay Paul. Tucson is still a car town, right? I think 92% of the people in Pima County own and operate a car, and a very small percentage use the bus. That's not saying cars are more important than bus riders. It's just, it's somewhat of an economic fact. I think it's important for us to be multimodal, and we shouldn't be pitting pedestrians versus bicyclists versus bus riders versus cars, whatever. I think we need to have room for all. And I think this budget really shifts that. This new proposal really it creates an imbalance between people that drive the cars to work every day, go to job sites, whatever they need to do, doctor's appointments. And the bus system is just not robust enough. And Tucson simply just doesn't have the density yet, in my opinion, compared to other cities. So I would vote against this, number one. I think number two, we're not thinking about the future of transportation in the area. I know Bruce has been big on technology. Eventually, we're going to have autonomous cars. We're going to have cars that will efficiently travel throughout the city and the freeways. And they'll be electric based, so they'll reduce some of that environmental things we're worried about. Number three, I think this new hybrid plan completely disregards the last years of work that we've been doing and what the agencies have been doing all the recommendations that's come up through this group and the basic framework and the prioritization was coming from all the member agencies of the RTA. And I think this hybrid proposal flips everything on its head. It totally ignores what some of the other agencies are saying are the priorities. And so we're here as a regional transportation authority, and bicycling is great. And walking on sidewalks is great, but we can't say that's more important than the other. We keep hearing about pedestrians' deaths, or but there's twice as many vehicular deaths. So why we can't put one person, one mode of transportation on a higher route than the other? If we go back to the original plan, it pretty much splits that, where half of the budget is going towards roadway projects. And I think that's what the voters want. So based upon that, I couldn't vote yes for this new project. I think we've lost our way a bit. That's all.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Diane.
All right. This alternative proposal is the first time I've felt some hope that the work that we've done with our priorities, with our guiding principles, I feel like it's a yes and. Yes, we need roads, we need bridges, we need transportation and corridors. But we also have this amazing opportunity as we're planning for the future, for the people of 2040. What are they gonna say? Why didn't we have a more futuristic view that says people aren't necessarily going to be wedded to their solo cars going forward? We have another generation coming in. A lot of these teenagers don't even get their driver's license. And so as we're actually planning for the future, I feel like this alternative plan, again, isn't the only answer or the absolute final answer, but at least it's moving our needle in a direction that we're looking towards the future and the changes. And we wanted to build in that flexibility. I do feel like Moss's city statistics were fairly revealing. And if we are one of the fastest growing cities in the West, we have to plan for that, like all those people. And when you say park and ride is a failure, once again, I'm a poster child for parked at the Mercado, rode the streetcar here. I don't understand why you're all not doing that. I'd like to encourage you to try it if you've never been on it. But there are times in our community when we can make that a priority, when we have the need for that high capacity transit. And I apologize if I'm repeating what other people have said, but I just wanted to say that this alternate proposal and the work that's been done on it, I feel is very thoughtful, and we should really take that under consideration.
Thank you.
Thanks, Diane. Bruce.
Yeah, I know, well, the supervisor and General Maxwell said we should take up these policy considerations later. But we submitted these policy considerations along with this plan because they have relevance to the methodology and the assumptions that we're making about how to fund this. You're asking us to, Chris's point, move dollars from here to there based on the existing plan. And we are trying to put some conditions on the table that might give us a different pathway to funding these proposals. I'll give you one example, and that's why I think these policy recommendations or considerations that we submitted should be included in the consideration by the committee as it looks at the alternative proposal. As an example, estimates of revenue are based on a very conservative model. What happens if, in fact, we don't have another Great Recession? And what happens if we continue to grow as projected and we see significantly more revenue being generated by the half-cent tax? Is it possible for us to set up conditions under which we can accomplish both roadway projects and this transit based upon thresholds met in increased revenue, and have that understanding as a concept and a principle going forward with this plan? So that's one example of that. The contingency money is another example. It's a matter of methodology and approach. If we require all the roadway projects to build the necessary contingency into those projects, then that is in place when cost overruns or inflation or those things happen. Yes, it will move the amount up higher, the number of projects fewer, because we won't have enough money as allocated because we have to write those contingencies into those plans. But again, it's a matter of how we approach this and be creative about the committee making a commitment to how we want to move forward and build in some of these contingencies to say, if this happens, this is the way we're going to go. Another one of the principles we wrote into this is that there ought to be a commitment if significant new revenues are generated, that they are allocated to the percentages that we have set in this plan and not just put into a general fund that can be used by the RTA for other purposes or in other ways. So I believe we need to take a look at these policy considerations in tandem with the alternative proposal that we put on the table.
Well, I think that because they were submitted together, they are. They're part and parcel. And the reason that I have been trying to get straw poll, sorry, Edmund, but I'm trying to get a sense and make sure that everyone understands that the differences also come with justification and or policy changes, as Bruce has just stated. And so that's why it's important, I think, for us to address those one by one, because they have an impact on the plan itself and they have a policy impact as well. And those are the things that this committee needs to have its eyes open about as we go forward. If we're going to approve this, let's also make sure that we know what those impacts are. And, you know, a couple of them have been brought up by other speakers, but one of those is the contingency, the additional contingency. And I guess the point that I've heard made before is that we had contingencies in all of the projects on RTA 1. We didn't have a contingency for a Great Recession. And while it's true that revenues may be greater than projected, especially since we have a pessimistic projection, what if they're not? Look where we are now. Now we have 10% of our overall project, or more than 10, maybe 12% or so of the overall RTA 1 that we can't fund. And so it has to be funded here in RTA next. So those are all things I want the committee to go in with their eyes open about. The proposal is kind of elegant in the way that it's been presented, but we have to understand those details and those impacts.
So, Mr. Chairman, is it appropriate then, because the rest of the committee haven't received these policy considerations, that they be distributed before we discuss this further? These policy considerations that we brought forward. And secondly, just to your other point, one contingency is that we do have another recession. Another contingency is we don't. And both of them seem to me to be taken in consideration as we evaluate the approach and the construct and the framework of what you're putting forward.
Yeah, I heard your point, and I support that, and it should be discussed. Likewise, the question of more than a half cent needs to be. These are all policy decisions, decisions for the board to make with, you know, whatever advice we may choose to give them. But it's not really feasible, in my view, for us to go through all of those, because you've laid some out, but there's probably ones that have been maybe half again more or the same amount more that have been suggested at different times by committee members. I think the month of July is when we're going to look at those. If we approve this alternative plan, we will be essentially supporting policy changes. And I believe that we need to have those crafted properly with full discussion and justification and documentation before we send those to the board. So that's why I'm trying to get us to recognize that we know what the impacts are by each of the assumptions that are being made in order to develop this. And we will develop a formal proposal, a formal policy proposal, if you will, in support of that. Just not at this meeting, I'm sure.
If I just want to make one more point to your point, even a small percentage increase beyond the half cent, not a full cent or 3/4 cent, could in fact address the shortfall that we're talking about.
Right.
We could come to that point where we could address that issue. Those are the kinds of considerations that we all need to have as facts to be able to make a decision about whether this proposal or the other proposal is the best one for us to move forward on. So,
Mr. Chair, just to provide perspective, but I think hopefully you all can do the math as well. We're talking about roughly $300 million. So it's either $300 million of reduction to the projects or $300 million of new revenue. So just want to provide that context. That's what you're talking about. And then I would go back to what you were saying. It's really important that any recommendation you make has enough, hopefully, details in it so we know which projects are being impacted. Without that information, we're really not there yet. So we need to know which projects.
Okay, we're getting a backlog here. I don't mean to put you on the spot, Patricia, or any of the other 5 that are on the line, but could you make your comment as quickly as possible? Sorry I didn't mean to single you out for that, but.
No worries. Okay, yeah, I have a lot to say, but the most important part of it is, for the sake of consensus, for the sake of respecting people's time, it's 5 p.m. I'd like to reiterate my motion to approve the alternative plan, and I'd like to amend it that the transit subcommittee can resume its work, and that we as a committee reserve the right to revise our recommendation after we've had a chance to review Suntrans COA.
Okay, it's on the table. We're still getting more comments, and thank you for being brief. I appreciate that. I have,
That one again, if that's where we are right now.
what's that?
She
Said I'll
seconded.
second that because that was an
Oh,
amended
I see.
motion.
Okay.
I want to keep this moving.
I think she was just restating the original.
No, she made an amendment, Tom.
She made an amendment about the COA.
Is that her proposal?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Patricia,
originally.
can you say that again? Because Tom missed
Yes.
that.
No,
Yes.
I heard it. I can't remember whose, was it Patricia who made the original motion?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. and-
Yeah, I just amended it. And for the record, I do have more comments, but I thought we were trying to move this along, so I didn't do them. But I am in obviously approval of moving this along, and I think I've heard a lot that sounds pretty close to consensus that I haven't heard from this group since like guiding principal days. So I'm just feeling like this is a opportunity. It's a positive moment. I think we should just vote.
Okay, thank you. Kevin.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Couple things. First of all, I really like the proposal that the ad hoc committee put together. It's a lot of work. I appreciate that. I think it is important to have some sort of high capacity transit, some sort of named project in the plan. And so, and which project that is, I would defer to city or Suntran or something along those lines. There was one thing that I noticed under the safety element that wasn't named specifically, and that's technology upgrades. I think that is an important thing that we previously had in that element. I would like to see that specifically named in the alternative. And then overall, I'd be 100% behind the alternative proposal here, especially with the recommendation to go to 6/10 of the cent. If my math is correct, would certainly cover the $300 million.
The increase is 20%. Okay, Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for the record, I am not in support of any changes. I do appreciate all the compromise over the years that has gone in to get to where we are. Certainly, if the motion carries, Given what Farhad said, I would not want to see 300 million taken away from any of the existing projects we've all agreed upon. So I guess it would be up to the board to decide if they wanted to increase the revenue. So that's my stance. Thank you for the time.
Okay, thank you. Karen.
Quickly, I'd just like to understand the consequences of if this new proposal fails today. What happens next? Thanks.
Oh, I don't want to go there.
We all wither away with.
I don't want to go there, Karen. I have confidence in this group. Eva.
Thanks. I just wanted to cite The Field of Dreams, a fantastic movie. If you build it, they will come. So whatever we choose to build is gonna get used. We build roads, they're gonna get used. We build a high capacity transit, it's gonna get used. Let's approve this plan and put on these bumper rails, as Mass calls them. And, you know, we can have further conversation. The board can have further conversation about how they want to look at policy or how they want to pay for things or what they want to do. But let's use these bumper rails that we, you know, that we've come across, that we've worked to develop. I'm ready for a vote. I gotta go pretty soon. Thank you very much.
Okay, Arlen.
Thanks. I'll try to be very brief. And maybe try to convince Jamie to vote the other way.
I was gonna do that.
We don't have time.
Yeah. I come at this, I am a car driver. I ride the bus when my car is broken, and apologize to the bus folks that feel that's wrong, but that's the way it is. I'm looking here for a way to move a positive direction, positive thing to get this out of here with a maximum number of yes votes. When we look at the projects that we have, we left them alone. Generally speaking, we left them alone. Yes, you're going to have to take some contingency out of there, but some of the contingency, nobody does a project without 10% or contingency of some sort in there, because things go wrong. There's always change orders. If it means in order to do that, then you've got to bump this up from 5/10 to 6/10 of a cent. Maybe that is the answer. I don't know. But the bottom line, I think, is that with this and these policies that we have, which I do believe do go hand in hand, but I understand why you want to look at them in more detail, particularly if this passes, you want to do things like this, but there may be other policies. And these, you know, the board makes policy, but these are our recommendations for how to move this down the line. Farhad, you said that we need to be able to look at every single project and figure out what's going to get cut. Well, we're not going to do that because we're not engineers, we're not transportation planners. We don't have the ins and outs of my friend over here who knows everything, and I'm pointing to Rick. We can't do that, and we certainly can't do that in the amount of time that we have. But we have to trust staff, and we have to trust all the staff to come down. The only project that's in here is not a building project per se that I know about, is Sonoran Corridor, which is something that probably could take a little bit of a cut. And nobody's going to be it's a design project. It's a right-of-way project. If push comes to shove, that doesn't make up a difference, but it does add a little bit to it. Bottom line is that we need to come out of here with a good consensus. I don't believe we will get there, with all due respect, from the proposal that we originally were looking at. Which I voted in favor of moving forward. I was one of those yes votes, but with great trepidation. With this one, I have a lot less trepidation, and there are still questions to be answered, but I think we're on the right stance. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn.
And thanks, Jamie.
Oh, Chris, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I want to validate and commend Jamie's perspective, because he's exactly right. Lots of voters think in those terms and will approach this program in those terms. And so I honor your perspective, Jamie. But I would just encourage you to, the alternative includes $1 billion for roadways. So it's not, roads are the primary element of the alternative plan. And so that, you're absolutely right. I drive a car, everyone drives a car. The alternative plan recognizes that and puts $1 billion into roads. So I would encourage you to support the alternative plan because it does that.
Okay, Carol.
Just a couple of things. Back to the road corridor budget and what to do with it next. I have the kind of faith in the TMC as you do in us, Mr. Chair. And I think a good comment at the end of the last ad hoc meeting, and I think the full TMC still needs to meet. I think the mayor of Tucson said they hadn't met since April or so, whenever, I assume she's right. But the county administrator said, we were asked to put together a budget of 1.12 for roads. And that's what they did. They weren't asked to, see how far you could go up or down or anything. And I have full faith that they could do it again, just like city manager was talking about when they went back and cut some. And I know other projects have, like county projects and other projects have a scope too. But the thing that I keep thinking about, for those of you that were involved in 2006, the jurisdictions came to the table with the expectation requirement that they would have a 50% match through impact fees, or, everybody had to come with a match. And we've been really just requesting that they try to this time. And who's going to try to find a match? We don't have to. So, that's another way to get at it. And I appreciate what Chris said to Jamie, and to add to that about the $1 billion for roads. It's hard for me to think that we're putting all these other elements so far ahead of roads. When you look at the alternative proposal, transit is 30%, safety that you were talking about is 7%. Active transportation is 4%. Environment is 3%. And then the small business and debt service is 5%. None of those things add anywhere close to $1 billion. So I would say, Jamie, we really are still, just like Chris said, I don't want to repeat that anymore, but I just wanted to give you those budget numbers to show that these other elements are still in the line of what the staff proposal has, and even close to the 2006 ballot. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Farhad.
Just want to clarify, make sure everybody has the correct information. So the TMC voted to establish the working group because they wanted to engage with the CAC members. So that was by an action of the TMC to allow the working group to engage. So their recommendations are supported by the TMC's action. Here's your TMC representative.
Just, I wanted to give Carmine a chance to weigh in on anything that he's heard today, or give us perhaps a sense of how you see this in light of the TMC evaluating actually the original Moss proposal and not the one that's in front of us. Anything that, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but.
No, that's okay. Thank you.
That's okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, committee members, for the discussion today. I think that is keenly important, that everybody's voice be heard today, and that there be an attempt to move closer to a consensus along the way. And so I was asked a question a few CAC meetings ago by Arlen, whether the TMC found it difficult to get to the recommended framework, and it absolutely did. And I think that there are some key aspects
to the deliberations that took place and the recommendation that was forwarded by the ad hoc working group. And, you know, when we talk about the ad hoc working group, every single jurisdiction is represented on there. So the 9 jurisdictions each have 1 member. The 9 jurisdictions in TMC each have 1 member on the ad hoc working group. And as was noted by Mr. Mogimi, it was felt important that the Citizens Advisory Committee have representation on an ad hoc working group. So there was a lot of discussion that was happening in 2 separate forums that needed to be brought together, and getting to the place where things are today would not have happened but for the bringing together of that ad hoc working group. So starting back when there were 108 projects and the CAC was asking for recommendations, guidance, direction from the TMC on how to prioritize those projects. So I think a key element of the TMC's discussions and the ad hoc working group's discussions was that fiscal constraint, as Mr. Mogimi had indicated. And so the focus of the conversations was really around the named roadway projects. And it was the CAC that was asking for direction from the TMC in order to prioritize and get down to that $1.12 billion number on the named roadway projects. So there was a lot of conversation about the non-roadway elements, and you saw some movement in the modifications to scope and the cost allocations on the city of Tucson's part. There was a lot of discussion in the ad hoc working group about the named roadway corridor projects, and that there are components in each of those projects that cover things like safety and the active transportation components. So it is not that there wasn't action taken by the TMC on those things. It was viewed a little bit differently. And as many people as are in this room that have different ideas on how to approach this, similarly within the TMC and the ad hoc working group, we've had to work through those different perspectives on things. And I think another question I was asked in one of the CAC committee meetings is, what is the TMC looking for? And I think it's clarity of a recommendation coming out of this CAC. I know that it's difficult to identify named projects by this group, but nonetheless, tossing it back over to the TMC or the ad hoc working group without input on where to maybe look for those opportunities leaves that burden solely on that other group. And in the end, right, this is the Citizens Advisory Committee. And as I understand it procedurally, it's the Citizens Advisory Committee that makes a recommendation to the RTA board. TMC is there for technical support. And the ad hoc working group has been established to bring TMC group together with CAC to help move this forward. So I think that great progress is occurring. I understand that it is still a challenge on how to come together to make a recommendation that not only says shift monies, but gives some input in terms of where those shifts potentially might happen. So I just leave those comments with the group. I'm pleased to hear today the numerous comments that are being made by the members of the CAC, because I think that that's critically important in framing a recommendation to the RTA board that they then can do something with.
Thanks so much. Appreciate that. Last comment, Abby?
Sure. Every time I come to this room, I feel like I've entered the twilight zone, which is why I take such good notes. So I do want to remind us that the proposal that we're viewing is set in stone and competing with this one, passed earlier this same month by 9 to 7 votes, with 3 people, Bruce, Dale, Arlen, all saying, oh, okay, and Melvin, 4 people saying, I don't like this. So what we're hearing now today is something that is going to pass when we take a vote. That's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing that a few people aren't going to vote for it, and we're a big committee. But we also only had 16 people there at that last meeting. I didn't count, but we've got more than 16 people here. I don't know when that's gonna happen again. It's 5:15. I would really like to take a vote on this. I think that Patricia's motion gave us wiggle room, and I think that Bruce's clarification gave us assurance that policy documents are gonna go with this. We're gonna revisit it again. We're gonna get that information from the Suntran that everybody needs. Let's take a vote. If it doesn't pass, it doesn't pass. If it ends up split 9-7 again, or something similar to that, we've got a problem and we need to come back. But if it's got a clear majority, I think it gives us what Carmine's asking for, which is clear direction. So
Okay.
I don't know why we're not voting on this.
Well, because you keep talking.
Stop talking. You're gonna go off of the question now.
Patricia.
Cutting me up.
Patricia, would you please restate the motion?
I move to approve the alternative plan as our recommendation with the amendment that the transit subcommittee resumes its work and that we, as the CAC, reserve the right to revise the recommendation once we have the Suntrans COA in hand, and we can factor that in.
And does that suit your second, Abby?
Yes, I'll second that for the third
Thank
time
you.
or whatever.
I'd like to take a point of personal privilege just to thank you for the work you've done. And I regret that I have several issues with the proposal that I'm afraid are going to prevent me from supporting it. And I hate to say that, but I believe it's not advisable for us to eliminate the contingency, despite, you know, the good arguments that have been made against it. I also don't think it's really feasible to expect that scope changes will be made by jurisdictions who have already been asked to do that previously and have not come forward with any of the changes, or very many of the changes at least, that we've seen from the city. And finally, I just feel very uncomfortable sending to the board a proposal that I know at least is going to require cutting projects. I'll give you that projects will most likely have to be cut in any case once we receive the final cost estimates from the consultants. So that's work ahead of us for sure, no matter what we choose, in my view anyway. My uneducated guess is that that's what the case will be. So kind of for those reasons, I think we can fix this, but it just has too many red flags for me. So thank you for allowing me to do that.
Thank yourself.
I would like to, yeah.
Thank you, Mr.
Yeah,
Chair.
you didn't really allow me. You're right. Thank me. All right, let's do a voice vote first. We can go to a proposal. Did you want to throw something in real quick?
I did. I want to make what I think is a friendly amendment to Patricia's motion, and that's to also with recommendation to go to a 0.6% tax, and that would restore all of the roadway projects, the deferred projects, and the contingency.
Second.
Second, yeah.
Actually,
Patricia
you don't need
has
to
to-
stay- she needs to take it, not me. Sorry.
Yeah, that's up to Patricia.
Yeah.
Sure. I don't know. I hadn't considered it. Sounds fine.
And is there a second?
Second.
Abby are you gonna second?
I'm not gonna second that. Actually, that's gonna affect my support.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm rescheduling my guitar lesson.
I second. I second.
Mr. Chair, just to be clear, the person who seconded needs to either agree or disagree. If she does not agree, then the motion The amendment is not acceptable.
What? No, somebody else seconded.
Who seconded the motion? I'm sorry, you did? I'm sorry, yes, then you're good. I thought she seconded the original
She
motion.
did it. She
So
did.
we need your agreement to accept the amendment.
Wait, Kevin made a friendly amendment to Patricia's motion. Patricia accepted it. We need the original second to
Yep,
accept it.
yep.
I'll accept it and I'm angry about it. So sales
Good one.
taxes affect poor people the most, and you all are talking about road widenings and not transportation in the city. And that makes me mad. And so I do need to put on the record too, that I don't really like any of these plans. I don't like cars. I almost got hit by one today, right? Like, this is a compromise. I want everyone to understand that you think people who want 30% for public transportation are coming for your cars. I want 100% of public transportation, but I will second this motion with the amendment because I want to see it move, because I think this might not have 100% consensus, but I think it's got a lot of support. And I think it's got a lot of heart and a lot of thought. And I think we should get that done so I can do my guitar lesson.
All right. It's been moved and seconded and a friendly amendment has been added. Does anyone need further information about the motion before we ask first for a, well, let's just go directly to a roll call vote. Could you help us out with that, Hockey?
Sure. Sean Brown,
Yes, I.
Carolyn Campbell,
Aye.
Mel Cohen,
Aye.
Marlon,
Aye.
Chuck Dorr,
Aye.
Michael Edmonds,
Aye.
Ramon Ganders,
Aye.
Justine Hernandez,
Aye.
Yolanda Herrera,
I'm just going to say something real quick. I will be an aye if you remove the bridge over Drexel. As I said that back in 206, it is not a good idea for my neighborhood.
Are you an aye or not?
But I take that out.
We're not taking it out. Okay.
Is it
Yeah,
still?
we
in
can't,
the-
we're not, this motion does not.
I know,
take it
I
out.
just want to go on the record, okay?
Right, so that's a nay.
Ron Hill,
Nay.
Amy Colley,
Nay.
Karen Carl,
Yes.
Brian Keeley,
No.
Amanda Moss,
Aye.
Edmund Marcus,
Nay.
Tom,
Nay.
Abby, yay. Amanda Parkman, Amanda, could you repeat that? I'm sorry, Amanda, we cannot hear you. Oh, somebody was speaking. Okay. Eva Romero,
Yay.
Chris Schmaltz,
Yes.
Patricia Schwartz,
Yep.
Diane Shiplet,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yes.
Bruce.
Yes.
Did I miss anyone?
Debbie
Yes, you missed
Wainwright.
Debbie. Yeah, you missed me, Debbie. Oh, wait, can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Well, that's Debbie.
Hello? Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm a yes, please.
Thank you.
That was Debbie. We never did hear from Amanda. I think she's on, but off. Confirm the count. I've 18-6. Okay,
What was
so
Ava Romero's vote? Was it A or not nay? I couldn't figure it. A, okay, I think it's 19. I think it's 19.
I've got 18.
I got 18 as well.
Ramona, can you confirm?
You may have Yolanda as an I.
Yeah.
And she was an
You
A.
and I,
No.
you know, it was an A.
Okay, so by a count of 18-6, the motion passes. And that information will be forwarded to the board. When we next meet, we will be going over those policy provisions that this alternative and now our approved proposal require, as well as any others that folks may want to talk about. So please think about those before our next meeting. And
Is when? I'm sorry, when?
I don't know yet.
Oh,
I'll let you know. I know, well, our next meeting would be the day before the 4th of July, and I think it's probably not advisable for us to schedule that day. So I will work with the committee to try to get a better date.
Mr. Chairman, two things. One is that to Carmine's point, which is a valid point, I think this idea of the PMC and the CAC working together to resolve some of these points and issues as we move forward would be important. And I would strongly recommend that that be made to happen. I don't know who the best people are, but I just suggest that. And then secondly, on behalf of everyone sitting around the table and on the phone, I want to thank you, despite your vote, I want to thank you for your leadership over these years. This has not been easy. And if it was in my power, which being Jewish, it's not, to nominate you for sainthood, and the fact that you're not dead, thank God, I would do so. But on behalf of all of us, thank you for getting us to this.
All right, thank you. Just a reminder that most sainthoods are required as a result of some grisly demise of the saint. I'm fine how I am. It takes one miracle.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
can I just ask a question? The RTA board does not meet again until July 25th. How many meetings does the CAC have between now and then?
Well, it hasn't been decided at this point, but we've asked CAC members to kind of into the future reserve 2 meetings, first and third Mondays.
So here's the reason I'm asking that question, and it builds on the point that Carmine made, that in the phrase that he used is you're tossing it back over to either the TMC or the ad hoc working group. You have just had a rather significant vote, 18-6, in favor of the proposal that was put forth by the small working group. You've got some time between now and July 25th to flesh out some details before that is sent to the RTA board. You have liaisons in Mr. DeBonis and Mr. Rosema who can help you with some of those, some of that arcana. And I certainly encourage you to make use of that time so that when we meet on July 25th, we have more we have more details than what you're able to put together today.
thank you.
Yep, good advice. Thank you. Hearing no objection and Abby running for the.
Can I have a quick, we didn't resolve the policy, or if we're going to be talking about that next, it is going to go out ahead of time to people, or do we need to?
Well, we've talked about all of the policies, I think, that Bruce had included in his proposal. So I believe that can be sent out now to the committee.
Thank you.
So yes,
Okay,
we
thank
will,
you.
of course.
And I just would propose reinforcing your comment, if there are other policy implications that others have as a result of this decision, I think those should be brought forward by other committee members or the TMC if they want, so.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, thank you so much, everyone. Well done, and we are now adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.